And welcome everyone to another episode of Saddlefit for Life weekly webinar. We're excited to have you here today. Today we have a sort of a special topic, and we talk about sort of the importance of Saddlefit, but from a different perspective. So I'll hand it over to Jochen and we will begin.
Well, hello, it is Friday again, and I'm so happy to be here to share with you today's topic and what is saddle fitting from an aspect of saddle stuffing or flocking, what's also being known as. Many of you already have seen our Friday session. I'm always very delighted to see how many of you have shared our Friday session, and that's why we have always lots of new people coming. So very quick, my name is Jochen Schleser. I grew up in Buenos Aires. I love horses. I always wanted to be on the horse, and when we moved back to Germany, my father fulfilled my wish, my dream, and we bought horses, and I had a very, very talented horses. This is my horse, Pirate. Pirate was, or in German we say Pirat. He was 17.3. He was a Hanoverian and half thoroughbred, and he was an incredible, big-hearted horse. Our difficulty was the dressage, but he had no problem to do Grand Prix show jumping or four-star eventing, but he developed a lameness in his shoulders. Now, the shoulder, as we know, is in front of the saddle, but it does rotate upwards, backwards against the saddle. And of course, when we represented our country and we were riding on the European team and the long goal was 84, the Olympics, we can't have a horse what has rhythm problems, so looks almost like he's lame in dressage. So the coach says, you got to get that fixed, otherwise you're off the team. And long story short, we could never fix it. Back then in 78, 81, they had veterinarians and the body workers and saddle fitters or saddle agronomists who didn't exist back then, but they didn't have technology to really find what is really the problem on the horse. And over all these years, you know, when I was working with different veterinarians, different saddle makers and different companies, we always have one thing in mind is the majority of us, we love our horses and we don't just want to have them compete. And we trust experts such as the veterinarian and saddle salespeople and saddle fitters. But it was really heartening to see how many different opinions in saddle fitting is out there. And that's why I decided to come up with a different thing. And that different thing was not waiting until the horse has white marks, you know, or swelling on the withers. You know, I wanted to find out really what is the reason why the horse has so many different problems. It doesn't matter if you are as a soldier or if you are a working man or working girl, you know, or if you use the horse for riding or for pleasure. So the book I wrote, Suffering in Silence, it comes together with many different authors who helped me to understand it from a different view, from a veterinarian's view. Osteopath, chiropractor, even the farrier and the trainer play a huge role when it comes to saddle fitting, as well as people such as gynecologists, human doctors, who told me there is a massive difference. As a matter of fact, 9 differences in the seat alone, what makes a saddle specific for ladies and specific for males. So as a master saddler who learned from a saddler, I never knew it. Nobody told me this. So sure, I worked in my journeyman as in different manufacturers. This manufacturer loved this company, then I went to this, that manufacturer loved that saddle. And every manufacturer, of course, thinks their saddle is the cat's meow. And everywhere I went, everybody had a different opinion how the saddle should fit. So I decided to turn my attention to the people who went to university and know the human body inside out, doctors, medical doctors. And if people tell me there's massive difference in the lower back and in the tailbone and in the shape of the gluteus maximus, the different angle in the femur, male versus female, I better pay attention to that before I even put the saddle on the horse. And then once I have the saddle to fit the horse properly, I decide to the rider properly, who else am I going to ask? I ask people who are years and years and years experience in researching and studying the equine anatomy, biomechanics, physiology, and understand how everything comes together with the part we call saddle, and even what damage we really create to the horse's spine when we ride bareback. Most people ride bareback because it's fun. I admit it, I rode bareback. I went swimming with the horses, but everyday bareback riding is a massive problem. We have people from all over the world who say, the horse's back, it's very strong, and we put a saddle on and then the rider on, and the rider has to be balanced, the saddle has to be balanced, and that's where everything starts. What does balance mean? And I like to tell everybody out there, when you talk about saddle fitting, today we talk about the stuffing in the saddle. When you talk about saddle fitting, sure, I can stuff the saddle up in the back, like this saddle is a little bit too low in the back, but what is the end goal? The end goal is to get the rider balanced. Every human depends between the months of 6 months to 13 months, how to walk on 2 legs. So the baby figured out after crawling, I can walk on 2 legs. So the baby learns how to balance himself. And you will see every one of us, when we learn how to walk, we walk on our tippy toes, because that's how our body is designed to take the impact of the ball of the foot. So the ball of the foot, if it aligns to the sternum, like you see here with this rider, okay, the ball of the foot aligns with the sternum, then the human is in balance. If you're a jockey, well, your butt is way back, your head is way forward, but your sternum will always be in balance with your ball of the foot. So if you keep that, that's the rider's fit. Now, the saddle fitting to the horse has to be balanced too. That means I can't sit in the saddle where I get forced into a deeper spot in the back. Now, sometimes the saddle is too low in the front, but to fit the rider, his balance, you need to fit it to the horse's balance. Right here is the sternum of the horse where my mouse is, all right? So every rodeo rider, every bullfighter sits itself right there at the base of the withers. And all of you who have ridden bareback, there's a sweet spot at the base of the withers of every horse. So if you have your sternum over the horse's sternum and your ball of the foot, it's in that line, then you're in the balance. So once I learned all that, and I learned from veterinarians, the horse's body, when they move, the arm goes forward, the scapular rotates like an oil piston upwards, backwards. You might seen these oiled machines in the side of the road where the arm keeps going constantly like this. And in the same kind of rotation, the scapular moves. So we got to make sure that we do not hurt the shoulder. And you see here, you see this back area, the shoulders back there, they called it the ring of light or the dark zone. But what I learned from many, many veterinarians, they said, you cannot have any pressure on these lumbus versus processes. Absolutely brutal. The horse has all kinds of problems, from losing his clear walk, he gets a 4-beat walk, or lateral work, he gets a 4-beat canter, or he will simple buck, or he will have problems with his tail carriage, or especially a mare when she's in season, good luck riding that horse. So the length of the saddle is absolutely critical. And as a saddle maker, or for you as a person who wants to learn how to fit saddles, you got to make sure you do never ever impede the horse on the cartilage of the shoulder or in the lumbar area where the red area is. Easy to see on the skeleton. If there is skin over it, look for the ring of lights. Very easy to detect. So what we also see, lots of veterinarian uses all kinds of different tools such as thermography, and it's frightening. I'm doing this for many, many, many years. I started this now 42 years ago, and our academy is official 2006, and I traveled the world more than once. And no matter in what continent, what country I go, we see the majority of the horses have massive problems in the lumbar sacral area. So we have saddles who are not contact in the middle. You see the contact on the front left, front right, and contact in the back. But the real danger or the real problem is on the horse on the lumbar area. So here you're seeing a horse from the back. You see the dust pattern clearly going to the left, and the horse on this picture here, you can see how the whole saddle after riding ended up falling way to the right. Now, is that because the saddle wasn't stuffed right? Is it because the saddle wasn't fitted to the horse's shoulder? Well, that's what we want to come across. But if you do not pay attention to this, it always, always, always ends up in the lumbar sacral joint, the SI joint, right? You see it from the back here. You see hunter bumps and scoliosis on the spine. Now we have our balance on our inner ear. So if I feel like that, I'm not riding like this, I just go like that. So now I'm riding with a crooked spine. So I say, I am okay, I have a good chiropractor, I'm gonna get my back adjusted 3-4 times a week, I'm okay. But what you do, you now quadruple the problem by sitting always to that side. Not only does the horse has a hard time to avoid the pressure of the saddle now against the spine, now you on top forcing it really hard every stop into the right. So we really wanted to explain everybody there is many, many, many different opinions, but when you have a chance, you hear probably my little doggie in the background, it's Bella, and Bella is protecting our house. So if she barks a little bit, that just means somebody's coming. So here we see the horse, and you should do that too. Sit on the horse, let somebody else lead, and feel your hands on the shoulders. So when we talk today about saddle fitting and stuffing, we got to understand, if I'm sitting on the horse, gravity wants to push me down. If I have a girth in the saddle and I girth it down, we need to adjust the saddle so that this action you see here, how the shoulder comes backwards and the muscle contracts, is not impeded. Okay? We also need to understand that while we want to make everything symmetrical, and for all of your dressage riders who have ridden a horse and trained horses, your number 5 in your training scala is straightness. Okay, you all heard about the natural crookedness. Okay, look at this horse here. It's bigger on one side versus the other side. So in saddle stuffing, automatically you think, oh yeah, looks like the horse is less developed on the right, so I stuff it on that side. And yet it causes the complete opposite reaction you want. That will pull the saddle even more, and that big shoulder blade will really be a massive, massive problem for the horse. This veterinarian here from New Zealand, she travels the world and teaches veterinarian worldwide dissections. And she saw how many saddles, way too many saddles. They're not wide enough in the tree width or not adjusted properly in the tree. So if you want to stuff saddles in, put more stuffing in, or you take it out, you put new one in. Think about the stuffing on the saddle. It's the insole of your shoe. And the shoe frame is the tree. So if you have a shoe, what is way, way, way too narrow, and your toes sit on top of each other, you will get blood blisters while you walk, no matter what insole you put into it. The stuffing in the shoe, the insole in the shoe, is absolutely nothing. It will make that more comfortable. The shoe is too narrow. And the same with veterinarians. And again, Saddlefit for Life is an academy that talks about saddle fitting. And saddle fitting has many components. And one of them is, of course, the tree adjustments. So here we have an option of looking at this atrophy here. Now I'm going to stuff all that in and put all the stuffing in there. Or do I learn and listen to the experts who went years and years to university and teach at university the anatomy, biomechanics, physiology of the horse, and understand a little bit. Isaac Newton explains it the best. So higher the speed, so higher the force. So if I only stand there, it's one thing. But if I walk, I have a certain pressure. And we have computerized saddle pads, what shows us the second you have trot or canter, the pressure increases, okay, because you increase the speed. The saddle sits in an area here where the dry spots is, where the ribs are pretty steep, 70 degrees to 86, and then in the back, 12 to 45. So that will be the cantle be. And there's a whole bunch of muscle groups here, which are absolutely super sensitive and can have no contact, no pressure. And one of them, you all heard that before, is the trapezius, splinalis, and rhomboideus. The saddle, what takes the most load without damaging your horse, is the longissimus dorsi. So for thousands and thousands of years, when saddles were made for function, the saddle always were focused to be supported on that muscle. Unfortunately, today we have a lot of people who keep stuffing saddles in an area and make the saddle, here you see the D-ring, okay, it's already too narrow from left to right D-ring. They stuff more wool in there because they say, well, look at this horse here. This horse looks like a really atrophy. I got to stuff more so it doesn't hit the withers. So stuffing the withers doesn't really do anything, you know? So the stuffing needs to be even supplied everywhere. So here is the good example. You see the yellow line in the middle. That would be from D-ring to D-ring. That's the tree width. You see all of these three examples have the same width and they have different angles. Always think about two different parts of your gullet plate or the front part of your saddle. Here you see the distance of the D-ring very narrow, a little wider and very wide. But the angle in all of these three is the same. So this picture I like to show to people so they can understand there is a massive difference between a narrow, medium, wide tree. What does that mean? So I'm going to turn this off for a second. I want to show you quick and then we get to the questions. Here you see a saddle, which is really, really narrow from here to here between the D-rings. That is the tree width. But you see the bottom here, you can see where the tree ends, right in this pocket. The bottom here, the angle is very flat. So that would be a narrow tree width with a wide tree angle. So that would be considered a narrow, wide tree. Narrow tree width with a flat, wide angle. Here you have the opposite. You have a saddle with a very wide tree width, but very steep angles. So here you have a wide tree width with a steep angle, or wide, narrow tree. So this can be individual adjusted. So can that, because no horse is symmetric. And of course, this here can be individual adjusted and must be individual adjusted, because if this is not wide enough, how do you expect the shoulder to come through without the horse stumbling? So what I learned to work together with professionals is to really spend a lot of time to understand when and where should the saddle fit. Should the saddle fit in the cross tie, or should it fit on the motion on the horse where it moves? This horse here is moving on the treadmill, in the water treadmill. I've done this at the University of Cambridge in England. Look how much this horse moves in the back. And here you see clearly the ring of lights. Anything between the ring of lights and the back is stay away. So right here, if I go straight up from here to the end of the mane, that's how much space I got lengthwise to put the saddle on the horse. But I have to stay off the spine. 10 centimeter must be the saddle, front to back space, just like every Western tree is. That is in inches, 4 inches. Anything smaller, you have a problem. Sure, there's the horse that has less or sometimes very narrow spine. Okay, but if you do not stay off the spine, this is a massive problem. Sure, you can do operation, but we had a wonderful, wonderful back symposium last week, wisdom exchange, and one of the veterinarians says there's 32 growth plates on the spine, which close at the age of 6 years. Now, in the first 6 years is where it's the most important part when you start your horse riding. It doesn't matter if it's on the racetrack, if it's in a hunter jumper barn, in a dressage barn, or pleasure, or Western, doesn't matter. Whenever you put a saddle on the horse, stay off the spine, because you have 32 possible areas where you can cripple the horse. The horse will compensate and will calcify and has no more movement like this poor creature. And then that's game over. Okay, there's only so much you can do. So without further ado, I'm going to go back now and start with your first questions, or with the first part. You want to talk today about the saddle stuffing. Is that correct, Sonia?
That is correct. And this is a common question, not just from our viewers, but on our page and even the email inquiries that we get is why can't reflocking make a saddle fit? Like why specifically? And how come when saddle fitters come out, that's usually everything that they do? Like they only will reflock the saddle.
Okay, so let's look at a couple of scenarios. Let's start with this one. This one here has an extended panel to the back. Okay, so let's say this saddle is really, really too long for the horse, and all this back here is digging into the horse's back. No matter what you do, take the wool out, put new wool in. No matter how much you stuff, that saddle is too long. One of the first slides I showed the lumbar area. That is absolutely crucial that you have no contact there. And some people say, but what about the Western saddle? They go all the way back. Yeah, but the Western tree, the bar, they flare away. They flare away from the lumbar area. So when you put your tent, your kitchen, your blankets, your guns, whatever weight you put on your saddle, it doesn't dig into the lumbar area. Meant to sit in the air. If you have an English saddle and the back panel scoops up, the saddle panel becomes like a banana and it's riding on a rock and roll saddle. Okay, so this here, if the problem with the saddle is too long, there's nothing you can do with stuffing. So now the questions you ask me, why would they just stuff it? Well, it's an easy, make you feel good. It's a fast, couple $100 or $50. Saddle stuffers charge anything from $50 to sometimes $250. And it's a fast way to do it. Watch them how they do it. But the problem is not solved. If, let's say, the saddle fits great in length and everything else fits, and they just have to lift up the back a little bit, then it's okay. But if the problem is too long, that's not okay. Let's look at another problem. Let's look at this. This saddle clearly is not 10 centimeter wide in the gullet. Okay, sometimes saddles are really, really wide in the front, but not in the back. In the back is the most important part, that the saddle is 10 centimeter wide. Why? Even as a pleasure rider, when you ride outside in the field, you ride around corners, the back of the saddle swings because the saddle doesn't bend like a horse's back can bend. So the back of the saddle will go left, will go right. So if you measure, the most important part is the back. You gotta have a lady's fist. A lady's fist is 4-inch wide or 10 centimeter. So here, if you stuff the saddle, all what you do is making it worse, because most saddle stuffers, they come from the side, they stuff, and they make this even narrow here. That is absolutely horrible. Then sometimes the saddle stuffers put it on the outside or stuff it like a round pipe, and this doesn't even touch the horse. And then they say to you, look, the gullet is narrow, but it doesn't even touch the horse's spine. Again, you're not sitting on the horse. The compression hasn't started. And if your saddle fitter has fitted that panel like a pipe, now the weight-bearing surface is decreased. You have extreme high pressure because you now have two pipes on the horse's back, left and right. And the second you sit on top, it digs into the tissue. The second you do any kind of lateral movement, as a jumper, do a rollback, as a dressage, do any kind of envers, travers, or any kind of turns, as a pleasure rider, go around trees, okay? It will be a massive problem. So stuffing doesn't do anything there. How about this one here? Look how crooked that saddle sits. Now, how are you going to stuff this? There's many people who say, oh, I'm going to stuff the saddle crooked. Okay, so that looks to me that that saddle is either twisted in the tree, or we are not machines. Humans are not machines. And sometimes we can be putting more weight on one side than the other, and the saddle became very uneven in the flocking. Restuffing, reflocking, we always have to resole the bottom of the shoe and make the heel even. Okay? So I use the shoe on purpose because everybody who has knee problems, ankle problems, or hip problems will wear the shoes uneven in the heels. So not these days anymore. People throw shoes away, buy a new one. But a couple of years ago, when they brought the shoe to the shoemaker resoled the shoe. And what did the shoemaker do? They made the sole even. And the same with a good saddle ergonomist or a well-trained saddle maker or saddle stuffer. You want to make sure they make the panels even. So if you make the panels even here, but the tree is twisted, you still have spent $200 and the saddle still sits with the back right on the spine. Sometimes the stuffing makes it worse, like on the picture on the right, when you make the gullet narrow. So stuffing can only help if the channel is nice and wide, if the saddle doesn't fall left or right, or like I said earlier, if the tree is wide enough, so when you add more flocking, you don't decrease the tree width. Okay, Sonia.
Okay, thank you. And in regards to what flocking can help, what are some of the issues that flocking specifically can really help to alleviate or fix?
So let's say you have a saddle, what fits, like I said, front to back, okay, in the width in the channel, and it's not falling left or right. It's not crooked because the horse is more developed, but your horse has constant white marks or dry spots like you see here. Unfortunately, very, very sad, there are still people believe that the saddle has to be stuffed hollow. That means that the saddle should only touch in the front in the back. So when the horses bring his back up, the horses has even contact. Now the horse's back moves up and down in walk, trot a little bit more, and in canter this way. The horse's back doesn't go like this. Once you have the back up, it doesn't stay up. It's a swinging back. So everything that goes up goes down. So when you start riding, or when you have the horse standing in the aisle, let's call this neutral. Okay, and that would be fitting neutral. He brings you up. If it brings the back up, saddle is a little looser in the back and looser in the front. In the downwards transition, there will be a split moment where my thumb is in the middle, okay, where the saddle is hollow. So the best saddles have a saddle tree what follows, and they're adjusted to the rider's weight because they will always follow with the movement. But 99.9%, I should say, all wood tree saddles, even they say spring tree, they will not follow. Okay, they sit hard here. So let's say you have a horse what doesn't bring up the back. Okay, the saddle will be hollow. So what you can alleviate, you can make a saddle what is a little bit more stuffed in the middle. Remember what I said, everything what goes up will come down. So if the saddle is already hollow in the neutral, it will be super hollow in the downward transition. And if you have a saddle with digs in the front and in the back, like you see here on the picture, the horse will not bring up his back. It's the same thing I'm going to ask you, when I'm going to punch you hard in your guts, I might be surprised you once. But next time you see me coming with my fist towards you, you're going to tighten your stomach muscles to protect your organs from being damaged. When the horse feels constant pressure on the longest muscle in the front and the back, that horse will protect itself just like you would protect your guts. The horse will protect his back by tightening his back muscle. If the back is tight, there is no way he can bring up the back. No way. So what do we see? A lot of horses suffering with massive problem, digging in the shoulder and in the loins. That you can alleviate by stuff more in the middle. If you don't, the tree will crack in the middle or the wood tree will break. As I said, they're not meant to sustain this type of riding. So stuffing can be helping tremendously if the saddle is stuffed too round like a banana and it rocks and rolls. Okay, you can make it nice and smooth. And it can help if the saddle is bridging like I was just explaining.
Okay, and for people who are not well versed in evaluating their own saddle fit, let's say they flip their saddle over and they're looking at their panel, how can they tell that the flocking was done correctly And how do they quickly identify any problems in the flocking so that they know to call someone out to fix it?
Okay, so let's look at a couple panels. Let's see if I find one here. All right, so there's some panels were made out of foam. Okay, they're very thin and you can press on top, you feel the table. And some have wool flock. So here you have the panel open and you see all the wool, all the knots coming out. And you see all these little, looks like little tennis balls. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn off my screen share and I'm going to show you a panel. So this is a panel, and this particular panel comes from a dressage saddle. And you can see how the saddler used these stitches to close the cavity. Every wool panel has stuffing holes, and these stuffing holes where my finger is where your saddle stuffer or your saddler or your equine ergonomist can go by and fill wool inside. Now when this is stitched under the saddle, this is hidden by the flap, by the tree, and by the billets. So if I'm looking at the panel from the bottom, okay, sometimes the panel is stuffed like a pipe. Okay, so you have only one high surface. The back of the horse is kind of like flat like this coaster. Okay, so if this would be the back and the saddle would sit on top, you can see how little only the center of the panel would sit flat. So what you want to make sure is that the saddle is not stuffed like a pipe. So it sits like that. That would be really horrible. You want to see it as flat as you can, because that is how you want that saddle to sit, flush on the horse. Let's say your horse is a high spine, and the back of the horse has a really high spine. So the back drops off like this. And you look at the saddle, it sits like this. So the outside of the panel don't even touch. It just sits on the inside. This is very bad because that saddle will literally strip the ribs. It will pull the muscle off the ribs. So we want that panel to be in the same angle as the ribs of the horse. So that's what you can see. If that is not flush in the back, I would immediately look after that. Other alternative, sometimes when you look over the back, it is literally, when you look, up and down, up and down, up and down. It feels like a roller coaster. Just like in the picture I just showed you earlier, you will have most likely somebody who put lots of stuffing in there. Let me get a saddle. What has been stitched together. Okay, so here you can put your finger in here, okay, and you can feel softness but firmness. What you want to feel is if you take your thumb, okay, and you put it in on your pinky and you push hard, and then you feel your meat part of your muscle, you want to feel that. That's pretty firm. That should be like a well-done steak. Now, why should the padding be that firm?
Actually, can I just interrupt you for a second? Because I know for you and for me, we know how to feel a panel. A lot of people don't. They'll poke it with their fingers all the way through. So how should you run your hand over the panel to make sure that it's not like you're not poking holes in it and you're feeling it properly?
Okay, so when you take a saddle, hold it in front of your chest, put your wrist on the back of the cantle, and use your 4 fingers and push like this. Just like Sonia says, you don't want to push with one finger because you push in holes in. So go flat with the flat hand, and you see how I push it in. This is one way. The other way, you can lay it on the table, have a nice blanket underneath, and you use this part of your hand, and you push down all the way through. So you push a little bit down, make sure you have a nice blanket underneath, and you run it down, and you feel with this little meat pad of your thumb all the way through, because then you can feel how even or uneven it is. So to come back to that's what you wanted to see, right, Sonia?
Yep, that's exactly it.
So coming back to my point earlier, while you're feeling it, you need to feel the panel So it feels nice and firm like a steak. If you take your thumb and your index and barely touch it and now feel it, it's very mushy. This is the worst part, how saddles can be filled. That means the saddle maker or the saddle stuffer has not created a nice, smooth, even weight-bearing surface. They have just filled loose wool, or there's all types of materials, what is really bad, but they put loose cotton in there or wool, and that is very soft, but the tree will fall through. So let me explain what that means. This is your typical English tree. You see how narrow the rails are? If that saddle goes without any panel underneath, you cripple the horse's back. So what we need to distribute these narrow rails with the panel. Now I'm going to get the panel back. So the tree, I'm going to pivot that a little down. Okay, so the tree sits in the pocket here. This calls the panel pocket. And then it sits on like this. And you can see here, the tree sits pretty much nicely on, but here just halfway. So in order to distribute this here in this area, to make that wider, this area has to have a certain density. Give you an example. When you buy a sleeping mattress and it's super, super soft, you say, oh, is that thing soft? You will not be able to walk next day because that mattress did not give your spine any support whatsoever. So you want a mattress what is not rock hard. You want a mattress just like here, firm, but the top layer soft. Now in the old days, the flocking used to be horsehair and deer hair. And for you folks who are my age, around the 50s or 60s, you know when you were a little kid, all English saddles were really, really firm. Now that we breed the horses super, super sensitive, more and more thoroughbred, the skin is much more sensitive, we have to fill the panel what we call soft hard. Soft hard means the first layer of the panel is very soft, but then there is body, substance to the panel. It's not like your whole hand, when you test it, goes into no man's land. So in order to have a good panel, like Sonia, you asked me earlier how to test it. Number one, don't poke with your finger. Thank you for that reminder, Sonia. And number two, you want to feel the same density as if you push your pinky and your thumb. First is soft, and then there's density. Only then the narrow rails get to be distributed over larger areas so you don't cause atrophy and damage to the horse's spine.
Okay, and the last question is a bit of a two-part. So what are the worst and best materials for flocking?
The best is what simulates horsehair and deer hair. Because what you want a spring, but you want something that can be formed into a shape, but has that soft feel on top. In the industry, makes wonderful materials. And the best one comes from England. And most saddle makers buy from that company in England. And it's a wool what is 60% wool, 40% synthetic. The wool makes it nice and soft, forms it nicely. And the synthetic gives that little bounce back. So it would look like this. It's let me just stop that here for a second. It's a nice long fiber material. It's a blend. So when you put it in the panel, it never creates any little tennis balls or golf balls. And when you let it go, it bounces back. So you can form the panel to the shape of the horse. And it has that soft touch. So the best thing you can do is what we call a wool blend, 60% wool, 40% synthetic. The worst thing you can do, you see it here in the picture, it's 100% wool because they just clump up into tennis little ball. You say, oh yeah, my saddle is 100% wool flocked. All you have is a mushy panel without substance, what gets very lumpy very fast. Okay, so that's probably the worst. There's another one, what is the opposite? If you go 100% synthetic, it's a very inexpensive material to use as a manufacturer, and I can actually blow it in with air. It's very fast production, and the customer gets easy fooled because, oh, look how nice and soft and springy it is, right? But if you ever ridden a horse that has a lot of movement and you have that flocking underneath your saddle, I think you would hate it. Why? Because you feel you're sitting on the springboard. So there is no, it doesn't take the form of the horse's back. Plus what it also does, unfortunately, there are still many manufacturers who make saddles where the tree point is forward or the tree point is straight, but the metal is forward. So it's really digging into the shoulder. You're looking at a saddle upside down. Here's an English saddle with an interchangeable gullet plate where the metal plate can be changed. So if you have a wool flock panel, really soft, or a synthetic stuff panel, this, you can feel it without even girthed up. It's absolutely the worst. And that's most of the time when horses dig right there where that metal point comes out, have these problems. So that's not what you want, because there's so much movement and friction that these tree points, I don't know if you can see it, they snap right out on one or the other cheaper plastic trees. So the best wool is the wool blend, 40% synthetic, 60% wool. Doesn't create any lumps, any bumps. It takes the form of the horse's body much easier, and you create that nice and smooth panel you're after by keeping it soft but firm.
Can you talk a little bit about the downsides of pure foam?
Yeah, so if I'm looking at a pure foam panel, it's a really nice way of producing a saddle relatively fast. So this is an injection mold piece, and then you just make the leather wet and wrap it around. I'm going to show you another saddle here. I'm going to stop the screen. So here you see a pure foam panel. The first thing you obviously see, it's way too narrow on the spine. So this saddle here would really cripple the horse's back. This looks clean, and the wool, the rubber panel, or also known as foam panel, they never deform. Okay? But just like a rubber boot, right? A rubber boot doesn't mold to your foot. So you see this foam will keep the shape, but it will disintegrate. And if the horse changes it, it doesn't take the shape. Okay, so the best comparison is if you have a wool flock panel, it's like a leather boot. The leather boot will take the form of your foot and will eventually feel like second skin. A rubber boot will always be a rubber boot and never takes the shape. Downside on the rubber panel is if the horse changes, the veterinarian says, wow, your horse really developed some nice or nasty deformation in the back. You need to have that saddle fitted. You need to replace the whole panel, and you cannot just have it reflocked properly.
Okay, and those are all the questions we have for today. We don't have any from any of our viewers. So thank you so much for, sharing the insight on the saddles and helping people to understand, what saddles can be made of, what the flocking types are, the benefits and the downfalls of each, and how they can check it on their own without necessarily having to call someone out immediately. But I hope everyone enjoyed. I hope you learned something. And I hope you take this knowledge, go back to the barn, back to your saddle, and do a little bit of investigation for the sake of yourself and your horse. And on behalf of myself and Jochen and Saddlefit for Life, we hope you have a great weekend, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye.